JB, thank you for joining us. This is a special moment for you, right? Receiving this award, I would imagine it's up there.
This is pretty cool. Thank you. I really appreciate the recognition, and yeah, it's a great honor. And as you said, incredible company with some of your previous recipients here. I don't know. I'm used to staying kind of a little bit behind the spotlight sometimes. I kind of prefer to sort of be one step behind things and just getting stuff done and making it work. And it's unbelievable to see how this industry has grown and what, you know, the scale that we're at today, and also where we're going. You know, we're not done yet. So anyway, well, thank you so much. This is humbling, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, more than welcome. Did you think my thoughts on the election were they too optimistic? Were they too? We'll try to think this one over.
I echo your optimism, actually. As we were kind of joking beforehand, I'm an optimist by heart as well. I think we kind of have to be, I'd say, in some of these markets where we're building, we're trying to create change and innovating. And I am cautiously optimistic about the future of this industry in the U.S. in particular, and what this administration can benefit from and do here. We obviously can't change the current reality of what we have in the country, and I think, as you've highlighted, the Republican states stand to gain a huge amount from this. And this is fundamentally an industrialization activity that we're in right now. We're scaling up, we're building mines, refineries, manufacturing sites. That's a little bit of a different shift than where we were even just 4 or 5 years ago, when it was trying to figure out, okay, how, what's the incentive structure to kind of accelerate this and get it going. That's happened. Now we just need to make sure it's going in the right direction and it's balanced.
When you built the original Gigafactory in Nevada, you were saying actually most of that did happen under the Trump Republican administration. Can you just talk people through that story?
Absolutely. I mean, it's Tesla, prior to Redwood, and even Redwood, we've gone through, multiple cycles of Republican administrations, Democrat administrations. This is a bipartisan issue, if there ever was one. It's energy security, it's jobs, it's environment as well. And in the beginning with the Gigafactory, I mean, that was really, linked to a supply chain necessity for the EV, for the Model 3 at the time. And, it was a pretty audacious, amazing thing, that we had this concept to go and build several 100,000 EVs, which was, 10x more than anyone had ever done successfully or sold. So the first big question was, will anyone even buy that many EVs? But we also knew that if we actually wanted to succeed at that, we would have to have the battery supply, which didn't exist. So we had to preemptively start the Gigafactory project before even knowing if the customers would come or if the sales would come. And that was a nail biter. I mean, we literally had to bring the supply chain, in our case, Panasonic there, and was the first real battery maker to take that leap and commit to that factory and that supply chain before knowing really what the customers were going to do. I specifically remember the launch event for the Model 3. It's like distant memory in the EV industry now, but it was kind of a pivotal turning point where there were lines around the block for these. It was like an Apple iPhone launch kind of thing. And, over the course of maybe 3-4 days, there were several 100,000 reservations. And it blew all of the expectations away, even from inside of Tesla at the time. And I remember coming back to the office and being like, holy crap, we need to make this thing bigger. This is, we had kind of gone as far as we could, fundamentally risk it, with our planning, and then we doubled it. Really almost, 1 week to the next.
Can I maybe pick up on that, Jay? Because I'm really interested, and I think a lot of people in the room will be interested. What you described you did at Tesla was really creating a whole ecosystem for the company. And I think we're starting to see some of that around your plans at Redwood. And I'm really eager to hear what you think the importance of creating that ecosystem is. We have a very fragmented, diverse supply chain, lots of people specializing in lots of different areas at the moment. But maybe there's an argument to push things forward at speed, which we need to do, that you do need to do just what you described. You need to create that ecosystem yourselves under one roof.
Well, I mean, in the beginning of the journey at Tesla, I mean, some of that was by necessity, because there was not a supply chain. We couldn't go out and buy a battery module or a motor or a charger from any other companies. There wasn't that supply chain. So, we were kind of forced to say, well, we can't buy it, then I guess we better figure out how to design it and build it. And that actually led to a really inherent strength, I think, that endured and still endures for decades, which was tight integration, really excellent engineering optimization across all those, I'm talking more the physical components first. And that's benefited Tesla massively. I mean, it's a tightly integrated architecture across that whole vehicle and all the vehicles that they make today. But that's now extending, and needs to extend to not just the functional components, but the batteries, the materials, the active materials, even the minerals. And I think as we get to these scales, that dependency and the risk, of having a supply chain that's, global and subject to crazy geopolitics and maybe tariffs, which could be highly volatile. I mean, all that really hit home, through COVID. I mean, it was, now again, that seems kind of like ancient history, but it definitely kind of highlighted that massive risk of the supply chain that was even outside of the kind of just functional module ecosystem. So Tesla, I think, was one of the companies that kind of took some of that to heart and has launched a lot of initiatives to begin to make a more tight ecosystem. But at Redwood, one of the opportunities I saw, early on, back 2018, 19 was to help architect that for the whole industry. Because I think this is a fundamental opportunity across the whole electrification industry, cars, trucks, even stationary, is to architect that business ecosystem, figure out how to technically refine and reintroduce these materials. And I just saw this huge gap. I mean, there were no companies owning that. There was no incumbent technology or business, architecture for it. But you could look at the physics and say, okay, in 20, 30, 50 years, this is going to be the majority of the material flow. Most of the nickel and lithium atoms that are in that ecosystem will be flowing in a loop. How would it work? No one could say.
But why do you think that was, that people just didn't connect the dots? Is that a wider culture of not building stuff for so long, or is it something else?
I think it's twofold. I mean, one is it's far away. And it seems infinitely far in the future. So when you start to think about something that's relevant as the whole EV market matures and starts to reach some kind of steady state and turnover, people just say, okay, that's maybe that's 10 years away before this car comes back. It's too far to think about. Maybe that was one thing, to put blinders on people. I think the other was just it's unintuitive that these materials can get reused with such high efficiency. We're so used to a petroleum and fossil fuel ecosystem where things kind of go from extraction to refining to consumption, and that's the end. There isn't something after that. Then we worry about CO2. But this is fundamentally different, and that is unintuitive. And I don't think most people have, even though it's obvious, it's actually quite simple, but it's unintuitive, that these minerals can go into an application and then they just stay there. They don't get lost. They're 100% contained in the application. So they are all available to get remanufactured and reused. So that is a fundamental difference with the electric infrastructure and ecosystem that we're building so quickly now versus the fossil fuel, or especially petroleum ecosystem that kind of helped power that construction and is still helping today.
With the concept of recycling, like you say, being so relatively new, like you say, people just coming to terms with that fact that we need to figure out a full life cycle for these materials. I'm curious what you think, the opportunity is particularly for, here in the US. You see China doing bits and pieces around this, but obviously there's a lot more work to do to really get an efficient closed loop for the battery supply chain. What do you think the role, is this an area that we can see the US really taking the lead? In so many parts of the supply chain, it feels like the US is playing catch up. Is this a part that we can see take the lead? And maybe off the back of that, just going back to politics slightly, do you think that, one of the positives maybe coming out of the election is that the focus on doing stuff within our borders will mean that when we're not necessarily trying to take technology or partnerships with companies overseas to fill some of the IRA criteria, we can actually do it ourselves within our borders?
Well, to your first question, I do think this is a huge opportunity for the U.S. And I mean, if there's one thing we're good at, it's consuming. This is an incredibly powerful consuming market. It's an incredibly strong automotive market. We're buying a lot of these batteries. When you look at those graphs, and say who's buying all these batteries? Where are they going? We're a big portion of that. China, of course, is a big chunk, but the U.S. is very large. So that in and of itself creates the opportunity, that's the beginning of the chain that creates the opportunity for us to own, control, and reuse those same materials that we bought the first time again and again and again. And that's like sort of unintuitive because we're used to thinking in terms of, okay, we imported this thing and that was a bad thing that we had to import something. But in this case, it's sort of, I think of it almost as an investment. I mean, we imported it, but now we have it. And we should really work very hard to benefit from kind of the strategic value that we bought and that we took control of, being the minerals in the battery itself, the ecosystem around that. So I think that can be an incredible opportunity for the U.S. to sort of shift its position on this. It'll be very hard, I think, not impossible, but hard for us to ever really fully meet demand with domestic mining for all these materials. I am supportive of this. I hope and want it to happen, but the geology just isn't that favorable for enough nickel, perhaps, or copper within the U.S. borders. We can get some, but it would be hard to make it close the loop entirely. So I think with recycling and reprocessing, over time, that can be, I think, one of our most strategic ways to actually compete with external supply chains. If we're not having to, constantly import the same material, that gives us a leg up to actually invest in the refining and in the midstream manufacturing here. But to maybe your second point, that is missing today. So even if we recycle material today, if we refine it again, we're missing a lot of the industries along the way to benefit from that. So that is something we have to sort of figure out to realize that benefit and to actually capture that economic value. Otherwise, we could risk sort of being a consumer and an importer and then exporting our scrap, our waste, our value again for someone else to benefit from. That would be a shame, I think.
And what do you see as the role of, we've seen Redwood now move into that midstream and showing what you're targeting there. I'm curious what you think is the optimal role of a company like Redwood, and then beyond that maybe speak a bit about the partnerships. We've seen you with automakers, a couple of big deals over the past 12 months. So I'm curious about whether you see that as the model, that it's really you plugging into automakers, or is there where do you stop along that midstream?
Well, we're building into cathode active material. That's one of our big initiatives to manufacture CAM. And then our partnerships on the outgoing side are with cell makers, automakers who are stretching into the battery manufacturing. So our biggest key customers are people like Panasonic or Toyota and Pepas, their battery manufacturing arm and partner. So that's sort of our initiative, personally and directly to bridge that midstream. But it's tricky for one company to do all this. We need, I'd say, more of an ecosystem, really growing in the U.S. And this is where I do think, part of the implementation, the interpretation, the implementation of the IRA, missed the mark a little bit, and sort of de-incentivized, the midstream investment in the U.S. There was incredible success in incentivizing battery assembly, final assembly, and manufacturing in the U.S., but that was targeted at exactly what the incentive said. And big surprise, people have really kind of cherry-picked exactly where the incentive exists and invested there and captured the incentive to do the battery making to get the $35 per kilowatt hour. But as the implementation adjusted that and said, okay, well, the vehicle tax credit doesn't need local CAM production. It doesn't need local mineral extraction, mining, or refining. All of that investment kind of quickly moved to other parts of the world, wherever it was acceptable, where it would be cheaper, more geopolitically favorable, more incentives existed. So I think that is maybe one shortcoming in my view of how the IRA actually got implemented. And I think it's also a pathway, if you kind of play it forward, I think it's a pathway for how the new Trump administration might reconcile the IRA to make some adjustments and to reduce the outflow of money, which is one of their stated goals, to figure out how to slow down the flow of money into those incentives.
Do you think there were honest errors in the IRA, or was that politics at play?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you think the IRA, the way the IRA was written, and maybe definitions of mineral and chemical and midstream, the way it was written, the way the incentives are handed out, do you think these errors that you're talking about were like on purpose, like politics,
Oh, errors.
or was it just people just didn't know the industry when they were writing the thing and it was rushed out pretty quickly?
No, there was like quite a lot of strategy in the actual wording of the original IRA, the legislative wording and the intent. At Redwood, actually, we had some help in this and worked pretty closely with Senator Manchin and his team through that process and tried to give some input on what we thought was a balanced and really favorable approach for the U.S. I mean, one of the key intents, if we remember back to when that thing was first being architected, was to link the EV tax credit, the $7,500, which is a huge carrot. If you look at that in dollars per kilowatt hour, it's like $100 a kilowatt hour. I mean, it's some massive incentive. So it was to link that huge carrot back to very tough investments, huge investments in the U.S. supply chain. So it would be hard to get it. It would be extremely hard to get it. And it would only require, people could only get it, OEMs could only get it if they, invested in a supply chain, if they pulled their partners in to the US to create jobs, to really, build the whole supply chain all the way from mining to midstream to batteries. That was the intent. And it was the way the law actually got written, if you read it. What happened in the implementation is, everyone, kind of complained about how difficult that was to achieve those EV tax credits and said, well, this is nearly impossible. It can't happen. It won't happen. We won't be able to get it fast enough. So the rules were kind of made a bit easier. And instead of saying that had to happen in the US, the net got widened to really any friendly trade agreement countries. I kind of say friendly instead of free on purpose because, I think it really is, that's the intent of it, is sort of any friendly country, as long as those components were mined or refined or made there, you could get the tax credit, which functionally meant almost everyone could get the tax credit pretty quickly. So it increased the incentive outflow of money massively, and it reduced, all the midstream and mining investment, or at least the incentive for it, in the US.
Do you think, to that point around some of those friendly nations and how maybe parts of the IRA leveled that playing field to a certain extent with actual US production? I'm curious what you think the role of some of those, maybe the incumbents that were coming in at that time. We saw a lot of South Korean companies locating facilities. A lot of those that Simon showed under development had participation. Obviously, Panasonic at the Gigafactory as well. And obviously having that expertise, I think, I was speaking to a lot of people throughout the conference yesterday, and I think it was notable that the people at this point in the market have been in and around it so long that they appreciate the fact that we can't move parts of the supply chain very quickly necessarily on our own. And sometimes you do need that external guidance, that expertise from companies that have been there, seen it, done it. Do you see that as something that is a net benefit or a hindrance to a company like yourselves who are trying to create this new ecosystem?
I think it's critical that we partner and invite other companies that have expertise in this. If you really looked at where this is happening in the world today, it's not in the US. We don't have domestic companies that are experts in this stuff. And we're trying to build that at Redwood. I'd say we're one of the leaders, but on a global scale, if you look at the size of some of the other players doing this, they're doing it at a huge scale and very good at it. So I think it is important that we recognize that. We don't get too arrogant about this or overconfident, but actually partner, invite some of the friendly companies that we want to work with here to the US and incentivize the appropriate investments in the right parts of the supply chain, though. Because we will get what we incentivize. I think that's that's really a key part of any incentive structure, whether it's for an employee or for a country or something else. You'll probably get what you incentivize. And we've incentivized battery final assembly, and EV sales. So we're kind of getting those two things. We haven't incentivized, critical minerals mining, critical minerals refining, or at least to a vastly less degree. Or also the critical components, the active components like cathode active material or PCAM or anode materials. So to me, that's if we either balance the incentives, that would probably be the right approach, balance them so that then even those partner companies, friendly, region companies are then encouraged and see a clear economic victory to do that here as well and to invest here. Yes. And in fact, some of those activities were started. We've heard clearly in some circles that at the beginning of the IRA, people were launching these investments. They kind of saw the structure as it was written and said, okay, geez, that's really compelling. Here we come. And like ships were inbound with, a bunch of different, CAM factories and other things. And as the implementation rules came out, it's like literally the ships turned around and they're like, okay, never mind, not where we want to be right now, and it'll be better to be somewhere else. So we kind of, I think, did that to ourselves a little bit. But as I said, I do think there's a path with the Trump administration to, instead of just sort of, slashing and burning IRA or attempting to kind of, chop various pieces of it, I think we could be more strategic and say, okay, well, how can we match, their intent, with what the new administration is trying to achieve, with a more strategic approach to really a balanced effort that actually benefits the whole industry, benefits the US strategically, which again, I think is part of their intent. So that's my optimism. Back to the beginning of, why would I be optimistic? It's because I think, there is a path that could actually make the IRA even more effective at some of its original goals and still be very effective to the whole industry and to the Trump administration without just slashing and burning it and leaving things in chaos or disarray.
I mean, I agree on that, because back in 2017, as I mentioned in my talk, when the Trump administration did the critical minerals executive order, that was it. There's no point in kind of mining and refining critical minerals here if you don't have the industry to buy it. But now you've got the industry to buy it, and it's almost like there's an opportunity to be full circle here, and it's kind of, more 60-70% of that 110 billion went downstream. Probably maybe up to 80% of it went downstream. It's kind of there for the taking. I guess if the administration choose to go down that route, is that fair?
I think that's exactly fair. We've created an unbelievable battery industry in the U.S. The battery assembly and the vehicle demand that's thriving. So that's a pull into the market. But right now we're importing almost all the supply chain to feed that. And as you said, even if we had more lithium mining in the U.S. right now, there's no immediate customer for that. And again, this is kind of nuanced and not intuitive, and it's going to take some careful education, I think, and explanation. You guys are doing a fabulous job of this in a lot of circles, of how to, educate, policymakers, educate even some company leaders what that means. I think there's this perception that, oh my gosh, if the U.S. just had more lithium, suddenly, we'd have a closed loop, everything would be perfect. And, we need lithium, but we also need nickel. We also need, some cobalt, some copper. We need PCAM. We need CAM manufacturing. So we have to have every part of that chain. Otherwise, we don't really have it.
We have a video of what you guys are doing at Redwood. Are you okay to walk us through that video?
Sure. Possible? I think that's an interesting overview of where Redwood's at.
There's going to be a screen there, and we can, I think, cue the video and show people what's happening.
So yeah, thanks for that. At Redwood, basically, we're kind of building a gigafactory in reverse. It's sort of a funny concept and almost surreal sometimes for me to see products that I helped engineer, coming in the door, and then we're building automation to unmanufacture them, to recycle them, and to go backwards. And in some cases, the automation looks very much like production automation. At these scales, you can't just sort of manually do everything. It has to be automated. It has to have a manufacturing mindset. So today we're at about 20 gigawatt hours per year of material reprocessing, recovery, and reclamation. That's in a lot of different forms, and some of it's not just a simple battery, but that's, I kind of like to use the gigawatt hour per year metric. I think it keeps everything on a common unit playing field. And you saw a couple of the different sort of operations there, but we're taking in live batteries, modules from EVs, old stationary batteries, scrap material from other gigafactories. And we're also investing in CAM manufacturing. That's one of our biggest capital investments, is also about 20 gigawatt hours, 18 or so gigawatt hours per year in our first phase of CAM manufacturing, which is right now really one of only 2 CAM production facilities in the US, Tesla being the other. So this is, I think, pretty strategic and critical, and that's something we're working incredibly fast on to try and meet some of our customer qualification milestones and integration milestones. And the last part there was just kind of giving a look at incoming feedstock, and the sense of scale of this. Most people don't see all of that material sort of aggregated one place. And there's also, I think, some mindset still that, well, end-of-life batteries are probably a thing for the future. How many can there possibly be? Well, there's already a lot, and if you aggregate all of the potential recalls, service actions, warranty claims, with the partnerships we have with OEMs and other battery factories, we have a quite substantial market share in the US right now, and I think that's something that's a testament to the economics and our efficiency and safety in reprocessing this. So anyway, that's a snapshot of where we are today, and we're excited. We're growing fast, and this material feedstock is growing incredibly fast. 50 to 80% per year growth.
But when you think about that feedstock, and one thing I always find incredibly interesting with the work going on in the recycling field is how you mitigate for everything that is coming in, right? All the different forms, all the different chemistries. And can you talk us through a bit about your approach to that? And I only see that becoming almost more of a challenge as we go forward, because everyone wants to fine tune their battery to meet certain specifications, which means everything's slightly different.
It's a fun technical challenge. I mean, I personally love batteries. I'm probably more of a battery and energy guy than I am an automotive guy. So it's interesting intellectually and from a technical point of view to think, okay, how do we interface with almost every battery chemistry and form factor on the planet? We do pretty much see all of them. At a chemical level, though, and if you kind of just put your chemist hat on and start to look at these batteries, they're more similar than different. So from that point of view, there's some benefit. There's also benefit in just scale. And that's where we've seen better and better economies as we get to higher scale, because we can sort of intelligently campaign, group, and have enough scale of individual chemistries that we can kind of custom tailor our products and our output. So it's a little, a mine doesn't always have that luxury. They might have the ore body that they have, and they maybe it evolves a little bit over time, but they're focused on processing it. We can sort of grab from a lot of different buckets that come in and almost, create this sort of recipes that we can sort of have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and custom tailor the right, elemental mixes or sort of push the right concentrations of nickel or cobalt, for example, into different products, and create different value streams as well. So some might be higher purity, some lower. I think the closest analogy is a petroleum refinery. If I look at the world today, I'm like, who does this, and how are they doing it? That's exactly what they do. And they adjust their product outputs based on what the market needs. Maybe one day they'll shift to more diesel or more jet fuel or gasoline or distillates or something. That's kind of how I see this starting to evolve. We'll tailor things to feed one type of market, or if LFP is sort of in tighter demand, okay, well then maybe carbonate's a higher demand for lithium form. So I sort of see what we're building and evolving. It kind of looks like the battery materials refinery or battery refinery architecture.
As a final comment, this EV and energy storage thematic, we're just at the beginning, right? If we're not, we can all go home, I guess. But this is just the beginning. Is that fair? We were talking earlier about the numbers in the US.
It's incredibly early. Despite all of the excitement and sometimes the doom and gloom we see in the media about growth rate of EV sales, the number I really like to focus on is what percent of the fleet is actually electrified today, because that really represents the total addressable market. And in the US today, the total vehicle fleet is maybe about 1.8% electrified. Less than 2%. So we have 98% of the conversion to 100% electric to go. I mean, that to me is just like, it's a reality check, and it's also an opportunity. It's sort of this kind of sanity check that, holy cow, we are at the very earliest stage of actually the industrial transformation, the total dollars of sales into all these markets and products. So everything that we're seeing and feeling, we're like at the tiny beginning of that ramp up phase. So yeah, I think that, again, keeps me kind of grounded, and this is a multi-decade transition. It's not something that like the Trump administration starts and finishes, or it's not something that just kind of happens over the course of a few years. Even though the political mandates of, okay, we'll be done by 2030. Oh, no, we'll be done by 2035. It's going to take longer than that. And from an investment point of view, I actually think this is also a pretty optimistic story, because there aren't very many markets where you can see these sort of growth rates continuing for decades to come. And I mean, investors should be salivating about that. And I think, the long-term smart ones are, but you have to kind of look through the noise of what's happening with, oh my gosh, EV sales growth rate slightly changed last quarter. That's like the second derivative of this thing in the moment, and it's not the right point to focus on.
JB, I very much appreciate you taking your time out to join us and receive the award and to have a chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all.